The key question that I'm working with right now is thought an open philosophical question, or is it a closed scientific question, meaning a scientific question that we have a concrete answer to? And you may think, because if you've been following my work, you may think that obviously I'm going to say it's a closed scientific question, because I've made it really clear that in my understanding and according to the evidence that I've seen, thought is very clearly a product of the brain, by which I mean the mind and body are an integrated unit, and the mind is subject to scientific inquiry because the mind is part of the body. But I think it is an open philosophical question, because even if we assume the monist perspective, which I just described, and that's what I think is true, so I'm comfortable saying that I think monism is correct, and that the mind-body connection is true, and that we can study the mind through scientific inquiry of the body. So I'm starting from all of those assumptions, but I still think it's an open scientific question because, as I've mentioned, having studied both cognitive neuroscience and cellular neuroscience and the burgeoning hybridization of those, I can confidently say that neuroscientists are still arguing about this. So a cognitive neuroscientist is going to be trained to think about the mind-body connection in terms of schemas and biases and other terminology and concept from theory of mind and cognitive psychology fields, because those are its roots. And it usually uses tools like fMRI, EEG to interrogate that mind-body relationship, whereas a cellular neuroscientist, which I primarily identify as, but as I said, I've done formal education and research in both fields. But anyways, in cellular neuroscientist, which I primarily identify as, well, for example, in my research that I participated in, some of it we were looking at plasticity in neurons, and so that's a model where we look at how the electron potentials, the action potentials that go along the axons of the neurons and communicate between the cells, that the patterns of that communication and how it is modulated by and modulates the whole biochemical system of the nervous system. It's hard to say it really simply, but basically, like, if one neuron that processes a type of information, so like say in the hippocampus, and there's a memory that's being enforced, we'll see a higher frequency of action potentials, and then depending on the biochemical setup of that neuron system, it's going to downregulate or upregulate response. So that basically, this is how on a physical level, the shape of the neurons and how they interact with stimulus changes as memories are formed. So we think of memory and thought in this very physical way on the cellular level. There is a hybridization going on of cellular and cognitive neuroscience, which I'm clearly somewhere in that area. And if you if you ask different people who are also in that area where cognitive and cellular neuroscience are starting to come together, you're still probably going to get a bunch of different answers as far as how do we actually define a thought. So within the field of neuroscience, there's still so much disagreement about how we actually define what a thought is and what the mind is and how we measure it, that I would say it's still an open philosophical question. It still lies within the umbrella of scientific philosophy, because we don't have a unified, concrete answer to that question that is validated by science yet, which is exciting because it means it's an open question, so we can keep working on it. And this ties in with my discussion of Alan Turing's with the Imitation Game, because in the beginning of Turing's paper, where he introduces the imitation game, one of the first things, the first paragraph, he says that basically there are so many different definitions that people have of thought and intelligence, and that's why it's the imitation game and not the true human intelligence game, because if we can't define definitively what we mean universally by human intelligence, then we cannot measure it. So he decided instead that what we should measure is whether or not a machine could convince a human that it was a human.